The moving truck was still running when the police cruiser pulled up. Not 5 minutes after I'd arrived at my inherited lake cabin, a perfectly manicured woman in designer heels was already storming across the dock, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, officer, he's here. The military vagrant I told you about." The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with pine needles as neighbors gathered on their porches to watch the show. The crunch of gravel under the cop's boots felt like a countdown as he approached with that look, the one that said this call was expected. "Sir, I need you to vacate the premises immediately. There's a restraining order." Standing there, humiliated in front of an entire community, I watched my childhood sanctuary being stolen by some HOA president who thought she could intimidate a veteran. She had no idea she just picked a fight with the wrong soldier. What would you do if some power-hungry HOA Karen tried to steal your family's legacy? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I bet you've got HOA horror stories too. My name is Brock Steele, and after 22 years serving my country, I thought I'd earned the right to a peaceful retirement. I was about to learn that some battles follow you home. The lake cabin had been in my family since 1965, when my Uncle Jasper, a Korean War veteran with hands like leather and a heart like gold, built it board by board. Every summer of my childhood was spent on that creaky dock, learning to tie military knots and listening to war stories that smelled like Old Spice and pipe tobacco. When he passed last spring, he left me the only thing that mattered, our family's slice of paradise. The musty smell of his old tackle box still lingered in the workshop, mixed with sawdust and machine oil. I'd planned to spend my retirement there, fixing boats for the locals and finally reading all those books I'd carried through 3 deployments. Simple dreams for a simple man living on a master sergeant's pension. But Willowbrook Lake wasn't the quiet fishing community Uncle Jasper had known. Starting around 2000, developers began carving up the hills, dropping $500,000 McMansions that looked like they'd been ordered from a suburban catalog. The original families, Uncle Jasper's crowd, still lived in modest cabins along the shoreline, but they were being slowly surrounded. That's when she arrived. Delilah Thornbridge swept into our community in 2018 like a perfectly manicured hurricane. Everything about her screamed money, from her white Mercedes to her designer heels that clicked against the wooden dock like a countdown timer. She'd married Rex Thornbridge, a local contractor who'd gotten rich during the housing boom, and together they'd purchased the biggest lakefront mansion money could buy. Within 6 months, she'd gotten herself elected HOA president with promises of elevating our community standards. The afternoon light filtering through my cabin's dusty windows suddenly felt threatened by her vision of progress. The first shot came exactly 1 week before my planned move-in. I was loading my truck when a certified letter arrived, thick as a legal brief and twice as intimidating. The return address read Willowbrook Lake Homeowners Association in gold embossed letters that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Dear Mr. Steele," it began, dripping with false politeness, "your property has been identified as non-compliant with current community aesthetic standards. Before occupancy can be approved, the following mandatory improvements must be completed." The list was longer than my last deployment orders: new roof, updated siding, professional landscaping, dock repairs, window replacements. The estimated cost, $15,000. For a cabin that Uncle Jasper had maintained perfectly for 57 years. I called the number on the letterhead immediately. "Willowbrook Lake HOA, this is Delilah." Her voice had that particular brand of sweetness that comes with a knife hidden behind your back. "Ma'am, this is Brock Steele. I received your letter about—" "Oh yes, the military property." She cut me off like I was some kind of disease. "I'm sure you understand, Mr. Steele, that we simply cannot allow substandard properties to drag down our community's investment value. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in one of those veteran housing developments across town." The creak of Uncle Jasper's floorboards under my feet told a different story than Delilah's demands. These weren't violations, they were character. The hand-hewn beams, the stone fireplace built from rocks pulled from the lake itself, the screened porch where 3 generations of my family had learned to clean fish. But character doesn't show up on an HOA compliance checklist. "The improvements are non-negotiable," she continued. "Failure to complete them within 30 days will result in legal action to prevent occupancy. I do hope you'll make the right choice for everyone involved." The line went dead. Standing in Uncle Jasper's workshop, surrounded by tools that had built something beautiful from nothing, I realized this wasn't about property values or community standards. This was about erasing history to make room for someone else's vision of perfection. Delilah Thornbridge had just declared war on the wrong veteran. Delilah didn't waste time. 3 days after our phone call, a process server showed up at my apartment with papers that made my deployment orders look like love letters. Emergency injunction, immediate cease and desist, violation of community aesthetic covenants. She'd hired Blackstone and Associates, the kind of law firm that charges $400 an hour just to answer the phone. Their letterhead was so thick you could use it as body armor. But here's the thing about 22 years in the military. You learn that the enemy's first move is rarely their best move. It's usually desperate, loud, and designed to make you panic. So while Delilah was spending her husband's money on lawyers, I was spending my morning at the county courthouse, armed with nothing but a notebook and the patience Uncle Jasper had taught me during those long fishing trips. The courthouse basement smelled like old paper and broken dreams, but it was also where public records lived. And public records, unlike HOA presidents, don't lie. "Can I help you, honey?" The clerk looked like she'd been filing documents since the Carter administration. "Yes, ma'am. I need to research property deeds and HOA formation documents for Willowbrook Lake." 4 hours later, surrounded by boxes that hadn't seen daylight since the Clinton presidency, I struck gold. Uncle Jasper's original deed, recorded in 1965, showed clear ownership with no restrictions, no covenants, and definitely no HOA oversight, because the HOA didn't exist until 2003, 38 years after Uncle Jasper had already established his property rights. The legal principle was simple. Grandfathered property rights supersede any HOA rules created after the fact. Delilah's fancy lawyers had built their case on quicksand, but the real treasure was buried deeper in the files. Rex Thornbridge's construction company had been awarded an $80,000 contract for HOA road repairs in 2022. No competitive bidding, no other estimates. Just a rubber stamp approval from his wife's HOA board. The taste of stale courthouse coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't just about my cabin. This was about systematic corruption. "Finding what you need, dear." The clerk had wandered over, probably wondering why someone was spending their entire day in the municipal basement. "More than I expected," I said, photocopying everything I could carry. That's when I met my first ally. Mavis Kettleworth was sitting in the parking lot, struggling to get her walker out of an ancient Honda Civic that looked older than my service record. At 78, she moved like someone who'd been fighting bureaucracy longer than I'd been alive. "You're Jasper's boy," she said, not a question but a statement. "Heard that Thornbridge woman is giving you trouble." "Yes, ma'am. Just trying to understand my legal options." Mavis laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "Honey, I was a paralegal for 43 years before I retired. I know every property dispute in this county's history, and I know exactly what that woman is trying to pull." The sound of her walker tapping against the asphalt became a rhythm of possibility as she explained how HOAs had been weaponized by developers to force out long-term residents. Property values would rise, taxes would follow, and suddenly families who'd lived somewhere for generations couldn't afford to stay. "Your uncle was a founding member of this community," Mavis said, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "That deed you found? It's worth more than any HOA covenant, but you're going to need help navigating the legal system." "What kind of help?" "The kind that comes free, because some of us remember when this lake was about family, not investment portfolios." That evening, I spread Uncle Jasper's Purple Heart and my research across his kitchen table. The numbers told a story that made my stomach clench. Delilah had gotten a temporary restraining order that prevented me from moving in until a court hearing 3 weeks away. 3 weeks of motel bills that would burn through my savings faster than diesel through a Humvee. But I'd also found the ammunition I needed. Here's something every property owner should know. Always check when your deed was recorded versus when any HOA was established. Older deeds often have superior rights that can't be overruled by later restrictions. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you're causing trouble for some very important people. Might want to reconsider your position. A friend." I'd been threatened by actual terrorists. Some HOA president's anonymous text messages weren't going to make me lose sleep. But they did tell me something important. Delilah was scared enough to resort to intimidation, and scared enemies make mistakes. I saved the text, added it to my growing evidence file, and settled in for what I now knew would be a long war. Uncle Jasper had taught me patience during those summer fishing trips. Now it was time to put those lessons to work. Outside, a loon called across the lake I couldn't yet legally call home. But I was closer than Delilah knew. 2 weeks into my forced exile at the Lakeview extended stay, which had no Lakeview and questionable definitions of extended anything, Delilah made her next move. An emergency community meeting flyer appeared in every mailbox, printed on cardstock so expensive it probably had its own zip code. The community center smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and decades of potluck dinners. Folding chairs squeaked against linoleum as residents filed in, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Delilah stood at the front, armed with a laptop and the kind of presentation skills that could sell ice to Eskimos. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying that perfect blend of concern and authority. "We're facing a crisis that threatens everything we've built together." Crisis. Right. Like Uncle Jasper's cabin was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Her PowerPoint presentation was titled, "Maintaining Our Investment Value, a Community Strategy." Each slide was more ridiculous than the last. Property values, aesthetic standards, security enhancement initiatives. The whole thing felt like a sales pitch wrapped in fear-mongering. "Which brings me to our immediate security concerns." Delilah clicked to a slide that made my blood pressure spike. "Recent developments have shown we need enhanced protection for our community. I'm proposing a special assessment of $25,000 per property to fund these critical improvements." The room erupted in nervous coughing. Harold Finch, the HOA treasurer, shifted in his seat like someone had set his pants on fire. Something about his expression reminded me of soldiers who'd been caught stealing from the mess hall. I'd come to this meeting in full dress uniform. A little psychological warfare never hurt. The ribbons and decorations had exactly the effect I'd hoped for. Several residents were stealing glances, probably wondering why some dangerous veteran looked so official. "Before we vote on any assessments," I stood up, letting my voice carry the authority of 2 decades giving orders, "I'd like to request inspection of the HOA's financial records. As property owners, we have that right." Delilah's smile could have cut glass. "Mr. Steele, as you're not yet an official resident—" "Actually," Mavis's walker tapped against the floor as she rose, "any property owner in the HOA boundary has legal right to inspect financial records with proper notice. Robert's Rules of Order, which this organization claims to follow." The hidden agenda started becoming clear as Delilah stumbled through her response. Rex's company would handle all the security work. The same Rex whose previous contract had somehow cost $80,000 for road repairs that Uncle Jasper's fishing buddies swore they'd never seen. Harold looked like he was developing an ulcer in real time. When pressed about the books, he mumbled something about recent transitions and updating systems. Translation: someone had been very creative with the community's money. Here's a financial nugget every HOA member should know. You have the legal right to inspect HOA financial records. Request them in writing with 10-day notice, and any refusal is grounds for legal action. After the meeting, something interesting happened. 3 residents approached me in the parking lot, moving like they were conducting a covert operation. "That was brave in there," whispered Dorothy Millhouse, a retired teacher who looked like she could still discipline a classroom full of teenagers with one glance. "Some of us have been wondering about those finances for a while. Rex's work crews show up, make a lot of noise, then disappear," added Frank Morrison, whose weathered hands suggested decades of actual labor. "Half the time we can't figure out what they actually did." The third conspirator was Janet Polk, whose property bordered mine. Delilah came to our house last month, very friendly, asking if we might be interested in selling. Said she had investors who'd pay above market value for the right properties. The pieces were falling into place like a tactical briefing. This wasn't about community standards or security. This was about forcing out fixed-income residents and flipping their properties to vacation rental investors. Uncle Jasper's cabin wasn't just in the way. It was the final piece Delilah needed to control the entire lakefront. That night, back in my depressing motel room that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, I spread the evidence across the polyester bedspread. HOA financial discrepancies, Rex's no-bid contracts, Delilah's mysterious investors, anonymous threatening texts, the crunch of ice from the ancient vending machine down the hall punctuated my planning. I was fighting an organized corruption scheme with my military pension and whatever free legal help Mavis could provide. David versus Goliath, except Goliath had lawyers, and I had a slingshot made of public records. But I'd learned something important tonight. Delilah's support wasn't as solid as she pretended. Cracks were showing in her perfect community facade. People were asking questions. My phone buzzed. Nice uniform tonight. Too bad it won't help you when the bank comes calling. A friend. I screenshot the message and added it to my evidence file. Keep talking, I thought. Every threat you send makes my case stronger. Outside my window, Willowbrook Lake glittered in the moonlight, peaceful and beautiful. Somewhere across that water, Uncle Jasper's cabin was waiting for me to come home. Soon. Monday morning brought a new level of harassment that would have impressed even the most creative drill sergeants I'd known. An official county vehicle was parked in Uncle Jasper's driveway when I drove by for my daily check. A building inspector with a clipboard and the expression of someone doing a favor for a friend. The smell of Rex's cigar smoke lingered around the cabin's front porch like evidence of a crime scene. Coincidence? About as likely as finding honest politicians in Washington. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back," the inspector said when I approached. His name tag read Gary Millstone, and his handshake felt like shaking hands with a wet fish. Anonymous complaint about structural integrity, very serious violations. Anonymous, right, I'm sure it had nothing to do with the white Mercedes I'd seen leaving the area 20 minutes earlier. The violations Gary cited would have been funny if they weren't costing me my inheritance. Unsafe dock pilings. Uncle Jasper had sunk those pilings himself, and they'd survived 40 years of ice storms and summer squalls. Non-compliant electrical systems. The cabin had been rewired in 2018 and passed inspection with flying colors. Questionable foundation integrity. The stone foundation had been laid by craftsmen who actually knew their trade, unlike whatever Yahoo Rex employed. The repair estimates? $40,000. Coincidentally, Rex's business card was clipped to the citation. "You know," Gary said, trying to sound helpful, "Mrs. Thornbridge mentioned she might be willing to purchase the property as is, save you a lot of trouble and expense. $50,000. For a property worth at least $180,000. The insult burned worse than the Afghan sun. That afternoon, I drove straight to the VA benefits office where I met Linda Martinez, a caseworker who actually understood that veterans deserved more than just lip service. "Mr. Steele, you may qualify for several programs you're not using," she said, spreading forms across her desk like she was dealing cards. Disabled veteran property tax exemptions, VA home improvement loans at 0% interest, and something I think you'll find very interesting: historical preservation assistance. The historical preservation angle was like finding water in the desert. Uncle Jasper's cabin, built in 1965 by a Korean War veteran using traditional techniques, could qualify for protected status. And here's the beautiful part. Historical designation would make forced modifications illegal. Here's something every property owner should know. Historical designation protects your property from forced modernization. Check with your local preservation office before spending money on unwanted improvements. But the real breakthrough came when Mavis called that evening, her voice crackling with excitement over the phone. "Honey, you need to get over here right now. Dottie Millhouse found something in her late husband's papers that's going to change everything." Dottie's kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and vindication. Spread across her dining table were meeting minutes, financial records, and correspondence dating back 3 years. A paper trail of corruption that would make forensic accountants weep with joy. "My Harold was meticulous about documentation," Dottie explained, her teacher instincts still sharp at 75. "He attended every HOA meeting, kept copies of every financial report, recorded every suspicious decision." The pattern was crystal clear. Rex's company had been awarded 17 different contracts over 3 years, totaling nearly $300,000. Road repairs that were never completed, landscaping projects that existed only on paper, emergency maintenance that somehow always required Rex's specific expertise. But the smoking gun was a recorded phone conversation from last month. "Harold always kept his phone on speaker because of his hearing," Dottie said, pressing play on an ancient cassette recorder. "He was recording the meeting minutes when this came through." Delilah's voice filled the kitchen. "Harold, I need you to adjust the books before the annual meeting. Move the Rex payments to different categories, make them look like legitimate maintenance. I'll make it worth your while. 10,000 cash." Harold's response was barely audible. "Mrs. Thornbridge, I can't. That's not legal." "It's not illegal if nobody finds out. Think about your wife's medical bills, Harold. Think about how expensive healthcare can get." The crunch of gravel outside interrupted our planning session. Through Dottie's window, we watched Gary Millstone's truck pull pull into Uncle Jasper's driveway again, this time accompanied by Rex's work crew. "What are they doing?" Dottie whispered. The answer became clear as we watched Rex's men drag tools toward the cabin's water line. 20 minutes later, they drove away, leaving behind what looked like an accidental break in the main water pipe. My phone buzzed with a text from Gary. Noticed additional water damage during follow-up inspection.
Afraid this raises the repair estimate significantly. The sound of Dottie's coffee mug hitting the table was like a starting pistol. These people weren't just corrupt, they were criminals actively sabotaging my property. But they'd just made a crucial mistake. Uncle Jasper had taught me that patience catches more fish than aggression, but sometimes the fish bite the hook themselves. Time to start reeling them in. Dottie's hands trembled as she pulled out a manila folder that looked older than my service record. "Harold found this in your uncle's papers when he was helping clean out the cabin last spring. We've been holding on to it, not sure what to do." The document inside made my heart stop. Original Community Charter, dated 1965, signed by 12 founding families including Jasper Steele. The yellowed parchment felt substantial in my hands, like holding a piece of history that could change everything. "Look at Section 7, Mavis said, leaning over my shoulder. Her excitement was contagious. Water rights. The founding families had negotiated perpetual lake access rights for themselves and their heirs, completely separate from any future property regulations. Uncle Jasper hadn't just built a cabin. He'd helped establish the legal foundation of the entire community. But the real bombshell was in the fine print. Any major development affecting lake access required unanimous consent from all founding family representatives. Not HOA approval, not community vote. Unanimous consent from the original 12 families. The musty smell of old paper mixed with the coffee aroma as the implications hit me like incoming artillery. Rex's planned marina expansion, the $2 million project that Delilah's mysterious investors were funding, needed my signature. My signature. The signature of the troublemaking veteran they'd been trying to force out. "Sweet mother of pearl," I whispered, using Uncle Jasper's favorite expression. "She's been trying to steal my property because she needs my permission for their development." Dottie nodded grimly. Harold suspected as much. Rex has been buying up waterfront properties all around the lake, but he can't develop the marina without controlling every foot of shoreline. Your uncle's cabin was the final piece. The power dynamic had just flipped like a pancake. Delilah wasn't just some power-hungry HOA president. She was a desperate woman sitting on a $300,000 investment that was worthless without my cooperation. Here's a crucial property rights lesson. Water rights are often separate from land ownership. Always check old deeds for riparian access clauses that could be worth more than the property itself. "How much has she already spent?" I asked. Mavis pulled out another folder. Permits, environmental studies, architectural plans, investor presentations. Harold estimated she's already invested close to $300,000, plus whatever Rex borrowed against his business to buy the adjacent properties. The sound of my phone buzzing broke the silence. Text message from Rex himself this time. "Heard you're being unreasonable about some paperwork. Bad things happen to unreasonable people." I showed the message to Dottie and Mavis. "They're getting desperate." "Desperate people make dangerous choices," Dottie warned. Harold was genuinely scared toward the end. "He thought they might—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Uncle Jasper's sudden heart attack last spring was starting to feel less like natural causes and more like convenient timing. An old veteran living alone, standing in the way of a multi-million-dollar development project. The taste of bitter coffee turned metallic in my mouth as I realized the full scope of what I was fighting. This wasn't just about HOA corruption or property values. This was about people who'd already crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "We need to be smart about this," I said, folding the charter carefully. "They don't know we have this document yet. That gives us an advantage." "What kind of advantage?" Mavis asked. I smiled for the first time in weeks. The kind that turns hunters into prey. Outside Dottie's window, Willowbrook Lake reflected the afternoon sun like a mirror. Somewhere across that water, Delilah Thornbridge was probably planning her next move, confident that she was still in control. She had no idea that the game had just changed completely. The war room smelled like fresh coffee and righteous anger. Mavis's kitchen table had been transformed into mission control, covered with documents, maps, and evidence that would make a JAG officer proud. My team was small but mighty. a retired paralegal who knew every legal loophole in the county, a teacher who documented everything, and a secret weapon I'd just recruited. Chief Warrant Officer Maria Santos arrived in civilian clothes, but she still moved like active duty. We'd served together in Afghanistan, and when I'd called asking for help with civilian bureaucratic warfare, she'd driven 3 hours without asking questions. "Let me get this straight," Santos said, studying the evidence spread before us. "HOA president embezzles funds, husband gets no-bid contracts, they threaten residents who don't comply, and now they're trying to force you out to complete an illegal development project?" "That's the short version," I replied. "The long version involves what might be murder." Santos whistled low. "And you want to take them down using legal channels?" "Legal channels backed by military precision," Mavis corrected. "We're not just fighting corruption, we're dismantling a criminal enterprise." The strategy unfolded like a textbook operation. 4 fronts of attack, each designed to apply maximum pressure while staying completely within the law. Legal front. File complaints with the State Attorney General's office about HOA corruption. Request forensic audit of HOA finances. Invoke historical preservation laws to protect the cabin. Activate founding family water rights to block the marina development. Here's something every homeowner should know. State Attorneys General have HOA oversight authority. Corruption complaints trigger investigations that can pierce corporate veils and freeze assets. Santos pulled out her laptop and cracked her knuckles. "Financial warfare is my specialty. Give me those bank records." Financial front. Brock applies for VA home improvement loan at 0% interest. Documents property tax exemptions worth $1,200 annually. Traces Rex's shell company structure to expose money laundering. Identifies investor funding sources for the marina project. Here's a veteran benefit most people miss. Military legal assistance programs help veterans with civilian disputes. Free lawyers who understand both military and civilian law. "What about community support?" Dottie asked, her teacher instincts focused on building coalitions. Community front. Organize Heritage Day to celebrate founding families and original community values. Invite local media to cover historical preservation story. Build coalition of residents tired of Delilah's intimidation tactics. Document pattern of harassment against elderly and veteran residents. The smell of Mavis's homemade cookies mixed with the sound of keyboards clicking as we built our case file. Every document was photographed, categorized, and uploaded to secure cloud storage. Santos had taught me that digital redundancy wins wars. Intelligence front. Continuous surveillance of Rex's construction activities using trail cameras borrowed from Santos's hunting gear. Monitor HOA meeting attendance to identify Delilah's supporters versus opposition. Track property purchases to map the full scope of their development scheme. "They're going to escalate when they realize we're organizing," Santos warned. "Desperate criminals don't go quietly." "Let them escalate," I said, feeling Uncle Jasper's purple heart in my pocket. "Every move they make gives us more evidence." Luther Blackwood arrived as we were finalizing the operational timeline. At 74, Uncle Jasper's fishing buddy moved slowly but thought quickly. He'd been watching Delilah's operation for 3 years, documenting everything in the meticulous way that came from 40 years as a quality control inspector. "Rex's crews work fast and sloppy," Luther reported. "I've got photos of every shortcut, every code violation, every corner they've cut. Most of their completed projects are disasters waiting to happen." The crunch of gravel outside announced another visitor. Through the window, we watched Harold Finch shuffle up the walkway, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. "I can't do this anymore," he said when Dottie let him in. "She's threatening my wife's medical coverage if I don't cooperate, but I can't keep falsifying records." Harold's cooperation was the final piece of our puzzle. Inside knowledge of HOA operations, access to financial records, and testimony about bribery attempts. Plus, he'd been secretly recording conversations for months, building his own insurance policy. "We're going to protect you," Santos assured him. "But we need you to keep playing along for just a little longer." The plan was ambitious but achievable. 2 weeks of preparation, community building, and evidence gathering. Then a very public confrontation that would expose everything in front of witnesses, media, and law enforcement. "Think it'll work?" Dottie asked as we reviewed the timeline. Santos smiled with the confidence of someone who'd planned successful operations in much more dangerous circumstances. "Ma'am, we've got legal authority, financial leverage, community support, and documented evidence of criminal activity, plus we're fighting for something that actually matters." "What's that?" Mavis asked. "Home,"
I said, looking out at the lake where Uncle Jasper had taught me that some things are worth fighting for. We're fighting for home. Delilah's counterattack began with a knock on my motel room door at 6 a.m. A weasel-faced man in a cheap suit flashed a private investigator license like it was some kind of badge of honor. "Mr. Steele, I'm conducting a background investigation on behalf of concerned community members. Mind if I ask you a few questions about your military service?" The smell of stale cigarettes and desperation clung to him like cologne. Specifically, any incidents involving anger management, substance abuse, or interactions with military police? I smiled with the patience Uncle Jasper had taught me during those long fishing trips. "You can request my service record through the Freedom of Information Act. Have a nice day." The door closed with a satisfying click, but the message was clear. Delilah was digging for dirt to discredit me publicly. Too bad for her, 22 years of military service tends to produce pretty clean records. The real escalation came that afternoon when Harold called, his voice shaking worse than his hands during HOA meetings. "They offered me $10,000 to destroy the financial records," he whispered. "Cash. In a brown envelope, like some kind of movie." "Did you record it?" Santos asked. We'd given Harold a digital recorder disguised as a hearing aid. "Every word. But that's not the worst part. Rex was there when she made the offer. He said if I didn't cooperate, my wife might have trouble getting her prescriptions filled, said pharmacy computers can be very unreliable." The taste of bitter motel coffee turned metallic as I realized we were dealing with actual threats against an elderly woman's medical care. These people had crossed every line that mattered. That night, the sabotage escalated beyond broken water pipes. The sound of shattering glass woke me at 2 a.m. Uncle Jasper's cabin windows, the original hand-blown panes he'd installed in 1965, lay in sparkling pieces across the front porch. Spray paint spelled "military scum" across the siding in letters that dripped like blood. But Rex had made a crucial mistake. The trail cameras Santos had installed caught everything in high-definition detail. "Got him," Santos said, reviewing the footage on her laptop. Clear face shot, license plate, even audio of him laughing about teaching that soldier boy a lesson. The crunch of broken glass under my boots as I surveyed the damage triggered something darker than anger. This wasn't just property destruction, this was desecration of Uncle Jasper's memory. The workshop where he'd taught me to build things with my hands. The porch where he'd told stories that made military service feel like honor instead of obligation. Here's security advice every property owner should remember. Trail cameras with night vision and cellular upload can provide court-admissible evidence of trespassing and vandalism. Invest in documentation, not just locks. My phone buzzed at 3 a.m. "How's your beauty sleep, soldier boy? Shame about those windows. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit." Screenshot. Save. Add to evidence file. "Keep talking, Rex. Every threat you send makes my case stronger." But Delilah's final gambit showed just how desperate she'd become. "Mr. Steele?" The voice on the phone belonged to someone from the VA Medical Center. "We've received some concerning reports about your mental health status. Anonymous calls suggesting you might be a danger to yourself or others." "Anonymous calls," I repeated, keeping my voice level. "We're required to investigate all reports of veterans in crisis. Could you come in for an evaluation?" The bureaucratic machinery was already moving. Someone, and we all knew who, had weaponized the VA's suicide prevention protocols against me. Claim a veteran is unstable, trigger mandatory evaluations, create a paper trail that suggests mental health issues. "Ma'am, I'll be happy to come in for evaluation, but I'll be bringing my attorney and documentation showing this is harassment related to a property dispute." The conversation ended quickly after that. Santos found me that evening sitting on Mavis's porch, staring across the lake at Uncle Jasper's violated cabin. The scent of pine mixed with the diesel smell from Rex's work truck still parked in the area. "They're scared," she said simply. "Scared people make desperate moves." "This isn't just about money anymore," I replied. "They're trying to destroy my reputation, my mental health record, my ability to function as a veteran in civilian society. Then we accelerate the timeline." Mavis appeared with fresh coffee and the expression of someone who'd seen enough injustice for one lifetime. "Dottie's been fielding calls all day from other residents. Rex's crew slashed 3 more sets of tires, and someone left threatening notes for anyone who attended our heritage meeting. They're terrorizing the entire community," Dottie added, joining us on the porch. "Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street called crying. They told her the HOA might need to reassess her property for compliance issues if she keeps associating with troublemakers."
The sound of a loon calling across the lake reminded me why Uncle Jasper had chosen this place. Peace, community, simple values that couldn't be bought or intimidated. Time to end this, I said, pulling out my phone to call the one person who could help us finish what we'd started. Time to call the police chief. Police Chief Maxwell Henderson had the kind of voice that commanded respect without raising volume. 30 years of law enforcement had taught him that authority comes from competence, not bluster. When I called requesting a meeting about organized criminal activity targeting veterans and elderly residents, he agreed to see me immediately. His office smelled like black coffee and dedication, walls lined with commendations and photos spanning 3 decades of public service. The American flag in the corner stood perfectly pressed, telling me everything I needed to know about the man behind the badge. "Mr. Steele, I've been hearing your name around town," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Some folks painting you as a troublemaker, others saying you're fighting corruption. Which one is it?" I placed the evidence folders on his desk, financial records, recorded conversations, photographs of vandalism, screenshots of threatening messages. "Chief, I'm a retired master sergeant who just wants to live peacefully in his uncle's cabin, but I've stumbled onto something bigger." Henderson's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. The recorded bribery attempt made him lean forward. The photos of Rex vandalizing my property made his jaw tighten. The documentation of threats against elderly residents made him reach for his phone. "This isn't just HOA corruption," he said finally. "This is racketeering, RICO Act territory." But before we could plan our next move, Delilah launched her most desperate gambit yet. The emergency HOA meeting notice arrived by certified mail, hand-delivered to every resident. Immediate vote, removal of dangerous individual from community property. The meeting was scheduled for that Friday night, giving residents just 48 hours to prepare. The language was pure character assassination disguised as community concern. Recent incidents involving property destruction, harassment of residents, and documented mental health concerns require immediate action to protect our families and property values. Santos found me that afternoon, her laptop open to Facebook pages that made my blood pressure spike. Someone had created fake social media accounts posting inflammatory content under my name. Photos of my cabin with captions about military compounds and veteran extremists. Fabricated quotes about teaching these civilians a lesson. "Professional job," Santos said grimly. "Whoever did this knows social media manipulation." The crunch of gravel announced another visitor. Luther Blackwood climbed out of his ancient pickup truck, moving faster than I'd seen him move in months. "They came to my house," he said without preamble. "Rex and 2 other men said I needed to reconsider my loyalties or find somewhere else to live. At my age, with my medical bills, I can't afford to relocate." The smell of motor oil and old leather from Luther's work clothes mixed with the scent of fear that was becoming too familiar. These people weren't just corrupt. They were organized criminals using terrorism tactics against senior citizens. "Luther, did you record any of it?" He smiled and pulled out his cell phone. 43 years in quality control taught me to document everything. Got the whole conversation, including Rex saying, quote, "Accidents happen to old men who don't mind their own business." That evening, the community center filled with tension thick enough to cut with a combat knife. Delilah had orchestrated the seating like a courtroom, her supporters in front, opposition relegated to the back. The industrial carpet cleaner smell mixed with nervous perspiration as residents filed in like they were attending a funeral. Harold sat at the treasurer's table looking like a man facing a firing squad. Every few seconds, his eyes darted toward Rex, who lounged against the back wall like a bouncer at a rough bar. "Thank you all for coming," Delilah began, her voice carrying false sweetness over genuine venom. "Tonight we address a serious threat to our community's safety and values." She'd prepared a presentation that would have impressed propaganda ministers. Carefully edited photos of my cabin made it look like a military compound. Screenshots of the fake social media posts presented as evidence of my extremist views. Even a letter from a concerned VA counselor suggesting I was struggling with adjustment issues. The whole thing was theater designed to terrorize residents into voting against me without due process. But Delilah had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how many people were tired of living in fear. When she called for questions, Dottie Milhouse stood up with the authority of someone who'd controlled classrooms full of teenagers for 40 years. "Mrs. Thornbridge, before we vote on anything,
I'd like the community to hear some recordings that Harold Finch provided to me. Recordings of conversations between you and various residents that I think everyone should know about." The color drained from Delilah's face faster than water from a broken pipe. That's private conversation. You can't—" "Actually," Mavis interrupted, her walker tapping against the floor like a gavel, "threatening community members and attempting to bribe officials are criminal acts, not private conversations." Rex stepped forward from the back wall, his face flushed with anger and something that looked dangerously close to panic. "Nobody wants to hear your lies, old woman." That's when Chief Henderson walked through the front door, uniform pressed and badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The room went silent except for the sound of folding chairs creaking as every head turned toward the entrance. Game over. The silence in that community center was deafening. You could hear every nervous breath, every chair creak, every heartbeat as Chief Henderson's footsteps echoed across the linoleum floor. Behind him walked 2 deputies and a woman I didn't recognize carrying a briefcase that screamed federal authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henderson's voice carried the weight of 3 decades protecting and serving, "I apologize for interrupting your meeting, but recent events require immediate law enforcement attention." Delilah's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the panic spreading across her face like spilled paint. Rex shifted against the back wall, his eyes darting toward the exit like a cornered animal calculating escape routes. "Chief Henderson, this is highly irregular," Delilah managed, her voice climbing an octave. "This is a private HOA matter. Ma'am, racketeering, embezzlement, and criminal intimidation aren't private matters," Henderson interrupted. "They're felonies." The woman with the briefcase stepped forward. "Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating reports of organized fraud targeting homeowners associations throughout the region. Mr. Steele's evidence has been very helpful." I stood up slowly, letting my dress uniform speak before my words did. 22 years of service ribbons, combat decorations, and the quiet dignity that comes from serving something bigger than yourself. Folks, I didn't ask for this fight. I just wanted to honor my Uncle Jasper's memory by living peacefully in the cabin he built with his own hands. But when criminals threaten our community, veterans don't stand down. The room buzzed with nervous energy as Henderson nodded toward the back. Rex was edging toward the exit, but Deputy Martinez had already positioned herself there. "Before anyone leaves," I continued, pulling out the original 1965 community charter, "there's something this community needs to know about their legal rights." Delilah's gasp was audible as she recognized the document that destroyed her entire scheme. This charter, signed by the founding families including my Uncle Jasper, grants water rights that supersede any HOA authority. Mrs. Thornbridge's marina development has been illegal from day one. "That's impossible," Rex snarled from the back. "We researched everything. You researched everything except the original founding documents," Agent Chen said calmly. "Documents that show your planned development violates federal waterway regulations, state environmental laws, and the original community charter." Harold Finch suddenly found his courage, standing up at the treasurer's table with shaking hands but a steady voice. "I have recordings," he announced to the room. "Recordings of Mrs. Thornbridge offering me bribes to falsify HOA financial records. Recordings of threats against my wife's medical care if I didn't cooperate." The sound of his phone connecting to the community center's sound system filled the room. Delilah's voice, crystal clear. "Harold, I need you to adjust the books before the annual meeting. Move the Rex payments to different categories. Make them look like legitimate maintenance. I'll make it worth your while. 10,000 cash." You could have heard a pin drop. Then the murmurs started, building like a wave as residents realized they'd been living under a criminal enterprise disguised as community leadership. "Furthermore," I said, letting my voice carry the authority of someone who'd given orders in combat zones, "we have video evidence of Mr. Thornbridge vandalizing my property, photographic evidence of financial fraud totaling over $300,000, and documentation of systematic intimidation against elderly and veteran residents." Rex made his move then, pushing toward the exit, but Chief Henderson's voice stopped him cold. "Rex Thornbridge, you're under arrest for vandalism, criminal intimidation, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the silent room like a judge's gavel. Delilah tried one last desperate play. "This is harassment. We're legitimate business people trying to improve our community." "Ma'am," Agent Chen interrupted. "Embezzling HOA funds, threatening elderly residents, and filing false police reports aren't business improvements. They're federal crimes."
Chief Henderson stepped forward, and something remarkable happened. This man who'd served our community for 30 years came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute. Master Sergeant Steele, on behalf of this community and in honor of your uncle's service, thank you for your courage in exposing this criminal conspiracy. The room erupted. Residents who'd been terrorized for months began applauding. Elderly neighbors who'd been afraid to speak up found their voices. The sound of genuine relief and gratitude filled the space like fresh air after a storm. Delilah Thornbridge, Henderson continued, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, and violation of fair housing laws. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked into place, I looked around the room at faces that had been marked by fear for too long. Uncle Jasper would have been proud. Sometimes standing up to bullies does more than protect yourself. It protects an entire community. Folks, I said as the criminals were led away, let's go home. For the first time in months, that actually meant something. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful over Willowbrook Lake, and for the first time in months, I woke up in Uncle Jasper's cabin, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with pine needles drifting through windows that community volunteers had replaced the day before. The sound of loons calling across peaceful water reminded me why this place had always felt like home. The community rally that followed Delilah's arrest was something Uncle Jasper would have loved. Neighbors who'd been afraid to speak for months emerged from their houses carrying tools, paint, and casseroles. Luther Blackwood directed traffic while Mavis organized work crews with the efficiency of a retired paralegal who'd spent 40 years managing chaos. Jasper's boy shouldn't have to fix this mess alone, Dottie announced, wielding a paintbrush like a weapon against injustice. By sunset, every trace of vandalism had been erased, replaced by improvements that honored the cabin's heritage instead of destroying it. The legal aftermath was swift and satisfying. Rex's construction empire collapsed when forensic accountants discovered he'd been running a shell game with borrowed money and fraudulent contracts. 3 years in federal prison, plus restitution to every homeowner he'd cheated. Delilah faced 5 years for her role in the conspiracy, plus permanent disbarment from any HOA leadership position. But the real victory was what we built from the wreckage. The Uncle Jasper Memorial Scholarship launched 3 months later, funded by recovered HOA money and community donations. Every year, it helps military children attend college, honoring the values Uncle Jasper had fought for in Korea and lived by on this lake. The first recipient was Maria Santos's daughter, who wants to study environmental law. Here's the most important legal lesson from this entire ordeal. Document everything in property disputes. Photos, recordings, and witnesses win cases, but more importantly, they protect entire communities from organized criminals. The annual Veterans Day fishing tournament became Willowbrook Lake's biggest community event, drawing participants from 3 counties and raising money for veteran services. Chief Henderson always serves as honorary starter, and the winning trophy is engraved with Uncle Jasper's favorite saying, "Patience catches more fish than noise." My boat repair business grew organically from helping neighbors fix engines and restore docks. Turns out, military maintenance skills translate perfectly to civilian life when you're serving people who appreciate honest work. The workshop where Uncle Jasper taught me to build things with my hands became a gathering place where stories get told and problems get solved. The combat anxiety that had followed me home from 3 deployments began healing in ways the VA hospital never achieved. Community support, meaningful work, and the peace that comes from protecting something worth protecting, those proved better medicine than any prescription. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was watching democracy work the way it was supposed to. The new HOA board, elected by actual residents instead of installed by developers, operates with complete transparency. Monthly financial reports, competitive bidding for all contracts, and a simple rule: no one gets to intimidate anybody. Property values stabilized once the corruption ended and the community's reputation recovered. Young families began moving in, attracted by affordable lakefront living and neighbors who actually looked out for each other. The mix of veterans, retirees, and working families created exactly the kind of community Uncle Jasper had envisioned. 6 months after that nightmare meeting, I received a letter from the State Attorney General's office. Our case had inspired legislation strengthening veteran housing protections and HOA oversight requirements.
Sometimes one person's fight for justice ripples outward in ways you never expect. The smell of barbecue smoke drifting across the lake signals another community gathering, where former enemies have become neighbors and shared struggles have built lasting friendships. Uncle Jasper's Purple Heart sits in a place of honor on the mantle, surrounded by photos of the extended family this community has become. There's talk of other veterans facing similar battles and developments across the state. A network is forming. People who understand that standing up to bullies isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting everyone who comes after. Heritage matters, history matters, and sometimes, defending both requires the same courage our ancestors showed in uniform. Your turn. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments below. You're not alone, and together we can fight back against corruption and intimidation. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about ordinary people defeating corrupt systems, because everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. Welcome to Willowbrook Lake, where veterans and neighbors look out for each other.
We appreciate you spending your time with us on HOA Stories, where HOA Karens finally get checked. If you enjoyed today's drama, hit like, comment on your favorite part below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll be the first to catch our next HOA Showdown.